and welcome to a new watercolor video. Today I'm doing a tutorial on how to paint this beautiful colourful butterfly in watercolors. I'm going to show you how to do it step by step using various different watercolor techniques such as wet in wet, wet in dry, and you can actually download the line work for it on my Patreon page completely free of charge. I'll put a link below to my Patreon page so you can get that. And also all the paints and the brushes and everything I've used, I'll also detail that down below in the video description. Okay, so once you've got it transferred to your watercolour paper, tape it down either to a board or the desk just to keep the edges nice and straight. Okay, so I'm going to start off by mixing up all the colours that we need to use first of all. So I'm using this Dioxazine Violet. I'm actually using Winsor & Newton paints, so it's called Winsor Violet. This is called Winsor Blue, but it's actually Phthalo Blue. Also, Alizarin Crimson. This is the permanent one, so that it won't fade over time. And next up is Permanent Rose, which is an absolutely gorgeous pink colour. So it's best to have the paint made up ready just to drop onto the page when you're ready, because if you start mixing your paint after you've wet your page, the page will dry too fast. So this next one is Winsor Red, which is a gorgeous bright red. Then we've got, I think it's Winsor Yellow, this one, but it's a nice warm yellow. I think another name for it is Winsor Yellow. And the red, the Winsor Red, I'm pretty sure it's Pyrrole Red, but I mean, it doesn't matter, you just need one of each of these colours. It doesn't really matter what brand you're using, just use whatever you've got in similar colours. Right, so we're going to start off by wetting the butterfly. So I'm using a mop brush here because it holds more water and you can get the area wetter much faster than if you used a little small brush that didn't really absorb much water. So I'm leaving tiny little gaps so we can have little white flecks, because anywhere where the paper's dry, when we drop the colour in, it won't reach those little dry patches. And so them little white flecks in the paper look really nice on watercolour paintings. Okay, so I'm adding quite a bit of water, and it'll probably need a couple of layers because the first layer tends to really sink into the paper and dry. The paper's very, very dry, so it absorbs that water, that first layer. But we don't want absolute puddles of water either, just a nice sheen of water on the surface. Right, so now we're going to start dropping in the paint. So I'll start with this violet colour to get a little bit, it's quite concentrated, this paint. Because the paper's wet, we need to add quite concentrated, strong colours, otherwise it'll just be too faint. So I'm dropping in some of the violet at the top corners, and I'm doing it bit by bit, side by side, because I want the colours to be in more or less the same areas. It doesn't have to be completely symmetrical, but somewhat symmetrical. So starting with the violet in the corners, and look how that just spreads out beautifully on that wet paper. It's just so satisfying to watch. Next I'm adding some alizarin crimson here, and I'm trying not to mix it on the paper with my brush. I'm just letting it kind of spread into the colour adjacent to it. I'm putting permanent rose on these blank little spots, so we've got like two little circles of permanent rose to the top. And now I'm joining on the phthalo blue, and I'm just putting it to the edge and then dabbing it in towards the middle, but I'm leaving these white patches in the middle. Then I'm going to go on to the bottom wings with the phthalo blue, starting at the edge and then just random dabs towards the middle. You just got to get that right amount of water on the paper so it doesn't spread too much, but it does spread a little bit, and it just gives that lovely blended edges. So I've dropped a little bit more of the blue at the bottom of the wings in, but it's more faint, and then a little bit more of the violet, and I'm just making it the same each side. Now this top part here, the permanent rose, it had gone faded, so I'm adding some stronger permanent rose onto that little patch there, just so that it matches the vibrancy of the other side. But it just doesn't, they don't have to match perfectly, because it'll just have that lovely loose sketchy watercolour appearance. And the little white flecks that I've left, you can see how nice they look. So we've got some little hard edges on the little white flecks that were left, and then we've got these softer edges where the paint spread into the water, and it just gives a lovely variety. Okay, so now we're ready for the second layer. So it's really important that our first layer is completely dry for this, because we want the second layer to go in more of a glazing fashion. So some of the colours will glaze over the top of these colours. If you put them on at the same time, then they would mix into the colours, and then the colours will go really dull and muddy. So that's why layers are important. So I'm just wetting the whole area again, and I'm being careful not to get the body of the butterfly wet, because we don't want any paint spreading over to that part. But if you can see on the outside of the wings, I'm adding water to the outside because I'm going to add some splashes as well, and I just want them to spread to the outside. Okay, for layer 2, I'm going to make a bit of orangey colour. I'm getting a little bit of Winsor Yellow, and I'm mixing it to the Winsor Red, but I'm just adding a little bit of the yellow just to take that redness off the red. And I'm starting right next to the body of the butterfly, and I'm dropping it in. It's a lovely strong colour, and I'm going to do that on both sides. The aim is to get it fairly symmetrical, but obviously with watercolour being so unpredictable, you can't get it totally symmetrical, and it doesn't matter anyhow because it looks nice that it's just a little bit uneven. Next I'm going to add some yellow just to the outside of that, just dropping it in dabs to the outside of the orangey colour, and just letting it do its own thing, just letting it spread out, trying to manipulate it a little bit just to like mix those colours together. And it's puddled, there was too much water on there, so you can just get a tissue if that ever happens and just absorb that excess moisture. Now I'm adding some clear water to the outside of that yellow because it's spreading out like in a perfect arch, and I didn't want it to look like that. So I'm using the brush and a little bit of clear water just to make that a little bit more uneven towards the edges, and then I'm also dabbing some of the excess off because it was quite watery. And then that little bit on the head, that quite easily lifted off with the tissue. Next I'm getting the Alizarin Crimson, and I'm adding some splashes. So I'm just tapping the top of the paintbrush to get those splashes, and you can see how they're spreading out because of that water that I'd put on the outside of the butterfly. And then I'm adding some more concentrated Winsor Red just right in those corners there, because I just want that bit to be really vibrant. And then a couple of more random dabs of Winsor Red into the wet. And then to help them spread a bit more, I'm now flicking clear water on top of that. So it'll just make its own kind of random patterns and spread it in its own way, so it ends up with that lovely sketchy watercolour look. So I've let that completely dry again, Now you can either use a heat gun, a hairdryer, or just leave it to dry on its own. It's up to yourself. And now I'm wetting the actual body. I'm going to do the first layer on the body of the butterfly. So I'm just wetting the area first. And I'm just dropping in some phthalo blue. And I'm dropping it in kind of a streaky fashion, so there's little gaps. If you can see the moisture on that, that's the perfect type of moisture you want really for wetting wet. It's wet, but it's not like puddled. And now I'm dropping some little bits of violet kind of into those little gaps that are left, just here and there. A little bit to the end of the tail, a little bit to the middle of the body, and then just in them little gaps, and then on the head. And then I'm just drying that off with a heat gun. And next I'm going to paint these little drips that appear to be dripping from the butterfly itself. So these are also going to be done wet in wet, so I'm just wetting the area first, and then I'm spreading that water out. When it gets to the butterfly wing, I'm just kind of, tapering it out at the top. Then with the Winsor Violet, I'm just dropping some little dots in, but I'm not taking it right to the top. I'm letting it spread to the top on its own. And then on the other side, I'm dropping phthalo blue into this one. Now I'm going to let that dry a little bit. Just let some of that water absorb into it. Now while it's still wet, I'm going to drop some clear water into that, and then that will make the pigment spread to the edges and give kind of like an outline on the outside. So that's what it looks like when it's dry. See how it's that drop of water push that pigment out to the edges. That's quite a nice effect. Now I'm moving on to each individual wing. I'm going to start with this one at the bottom. I'm wetting almost the whole area, but I'm leaving a dry strip across the top. And I'm actually using a smaller brush for this part. And I'm putting the brush almost flat, and then I'm dragging it sideways, so the tip of the brush is creating a sharp edge across the top of this wing. And then because the brush is almost flat, the bottom part of the paint is bleeding into the wet area, so we're getting a nice crisp line across the top where the paper was dry, and then it blends down underneath where the paper was wet. Now I've got some more paint on my brush, and I'm going around the edge of the body of the butterfly, and I'm just bringing it down a little bit. Then I quickly washed my brush and then dried it off, and then I'm using that clean damp brush to spread the paint downwards. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side, so wetting the whole area except for a strip across the top. And again, I've switched back to the larger mop brush, which is great for wetting the paper. And the reason I'm taking the water right down to the bottom, even though I'm not taking the paint that far down, is because if you leave like a dry line, like if I only took the paint halfway down, if I only took the water halfway down, just in case that paint spreads all the way down, it'll create a hard line at the bottom as well. So if we take the water right down to the bottom, there's not much chance of the paint spreading down that far. It'll only spread so far down, and then you've got a lovely blend, and you don't get like a strange edge where the water finishes. So again, I'm not getting this perfectly symmetrical. There's more paint on one side than the other. I'm just trying to manipulate it a little bit with my brush, but then I just leave it like that because it does actually look quite nice. Now I'm going to move on to the top wings, and I'm doing exactly the same. I'm being very, very careful though not to touch the dark paint on the bottom wing because it's not quite dry. Now if it's completely dry it's fine, but mine isn't, so I've actually left a little dry patch just at the bottom as well. So I'm doing exactly the same, only this is the violet that I'm putting on the top wing, whereas the bottom wing was the phthalo blue with a bit of violet mixed in. Now I don't want to lose that vibrant red on the inside there, and it's spread further than I wanted it to, so I've just absorbed that up with the tissue. And then I'm just going to add some more paint to the edges. I don't have my brush flat on this one, I'm just creating a thinner line, and then I'm actually just taking that up onto the drier area, and it's creating a nice crisp edge. And then I'm just doing exactly the same on the other side. Right, so that's the base completed. So now we just need to add some details. So starting with the wings, and I'm mixing some violet into the blue, and I'm going to go down the bottom edge of the bottom wings, and I'm just painting like a band across the bottom. So I'm just following the lines of the edge, the pencil lines, and then I'm just trying to make it a little bit uneven. I'm trying to make the consistency of the line uneven, and then also the colour uneven, like some more watery parts and some more concentrated parts. And then I'm just doing like a tiny little flick at the bottom inside of the wing, just ending it like that. And then exactly the same on the other side. Again, I've gone back to the smaller brush for these details. And this is a number 3 round brush. It's actually by Princeton, but you can't actually get these ones anymore. But Princeton, it's just a number 3 round brush, and it's synthetic, so you can get them in all kinds of different brands. So I'm dropping little bits of water in various places, and then I'm also taking bits of paint out in other places because I'm just trying to make it look uneven. I don't want it to be like a uniform strip, all exactly the same colour and the same width. And then dropping some more concentrated bits in there, just in odd little patches. Now I'm taking out some of the edges, like softening some of those edges, so that's giving it even more kind of a line variety. Now I'm going to do layer 2 on the body. So of course layer 1 is completely dry, and like I did with the bottom wings where I left a dry strip across the top, I'm doing that with this. I'm leaving a dry strip right across the outside of the body because I'm going to drop some concentrated paint into the outside. so that you've got that like dark crisp strip on the dry area, and then it will spread inwards towards the middle. So I'm using the Dioxazine Violet again, and can you see how it's just spreading beautifully into the middle of the body, but it'll leave some little gaps, it won't spread all the way. So it's important to use quite concentrated paint, because if the paint's too watery, it will spread further into the middle. So I'm just going all the way around the edge, and just keep going. I just keep on going back over the lines to neaten them up and get that lovely shape on the body. And you can see how the paint's spreading like more in the middle, and it's giving like a nice 3D effect. It makes it look more three-dimensional. Now I'm going to go in with even more concentrated paint. I think it's dried off a little bit at this point, it's not quite as wet as it was. And I'm just darkening the edge even more. Next up is the face, so I'm just going to do little outlines on the details of the face. So I needn't talk you through this if you just literally just copy exactly what I'm doing. Oh, and I forgot to say, I've switched to a tiny little detail brush. I was actually doing the edge of the body with this brush. So it's a very small brush, but it's got a long point on it. So I will put a link in the description. I got this one from Rosemary and Co. I'll put a link to it in the description. So if you want to get one, it's one of my favourite brushes. I absolutely love it. I think it's much better to have a detail brush that's actually quite long and thin rather than just a little short brush. You can get it holds a lot more paint, you can get long thin lines with it, and you get a lot more control with it. If you get like a little tiny short detail brush, you have to keep going back to the paint and putting more paint on it. Now with some concentrated phthalo blue, adding some outlines to the body. So I'm literally going over where the pencil lines were. And I'm just doing little curves, but I'm trying not to make them all exactly the same, but it's really difficult. It's not easy to do. So just adding some more details to the face as well. Now I'm going to add the same type of lines to the wings. So the lines are already there in pencil. I'm just going to be going over the top of them. I'm making some really watery violet, and I'm going to use some of the concentrated phthalo blue, and I'm going to make these look really sketchy. So I'm going to be leaving some little gaps, and I'm going to be using some of the paint watery, some of the paint stronger, just trying to make them vary, making them look sketchy as possible. So you can practice this on a bit of paper, because if you're not used to using a brush like this, if you press too hard, your lines will be thicker than you want them to be. So I would advise you to have a little practice on a bit of scrap paper first so you can get the knack of painting thin lines. And then you've kind of got to do it in like confident strokes. It also helps to hold the paintbrush further down towards the bottom as well. That's a good way of getting your lines to look a little bit more sketchy and uneven. I'm also going all the way along the edge of these top wings, just with a thin outline. I'm not doing the thick band like I did on the bottom wing. Then I'm doing the same on the bottom wing, only just on the inside, I'm changing my lines to a red colour, just for the first couple of lines. And then I'm going back in with the darker colour and just letting that run into the red colour. Just letting it blend in and then continuing the rest of the lines with the dark colour. So I'm just going to do that for all the lines on the butterfly. I'll just speed this little bit up because it's just going to drag on. Now I'm going to paint these little antennas. So I'm just using a really watery mixture of the violet, and I'm using my tiny little detail brush, and I'm just going along the outline, making it quite watery. And then on the inside of that, I'm just going to drop in some watery permanent pink paint, permanent rose. And I'm just gonna leave that like that, just let it dry as it is. Do the same for the other antennae. Then I'm going to get some concentrated blue and just drop it in the bottom and just let it kind of shoot up those little stalks. And then just leave that to dry as it is. Okay, so the final detail that I'm going to add is some gold details. So this paint here is my own handmade paint, and I do sell this on my Etsy shop if you're interested in getting any. I'm going to use the brassy colour from this little metals set. So it's a light gold and it's very shiny, and it's not like a really saturated yellow gold. So it's a really nice one. So I'm just making up some of the paint in one of these little wells, so I've got plenty at hand. And then I want some like really thin sketchy lines, so I'm using this dip pen. This is a dip pen by Speedball. I'll link it in the description below. So they're not really very expensive, and you just paint your paint onto the back of the pen like this. And I'm going to practice on a little bit of paper first, just to get the paint going, because it can bead up, and then if it doesn't go right down to the point, it's difficult to get the paint out. So you drag the pen backwards like this. It's got to be in this direction for the paint to come out, and then you get some little fine lines. Now I'm going to go over the outline of the body, but just very slightly on the inside. So you can see the direction that I'm pulling the pen in, and then that's how you get the paint to come out of the pen. It doesn't work in other directions. So I just want this loose, sketchy outline, and then I'm not going over those dark lines. I'm going slightly above the dark lines. So the dark lines kind of like act a little bit like a shadow to the gold colour. And you do have to keep reloading the pen. The paint does run out after a few lines. And then I'm just going to go on the inside of the face here, just add some details. And it looks really effective. Now I'm going to do the lines on the wings, or the veins on the, oh sorry, no, I'm going to do these pink circles, and I'm just going to do a really scratchy, sketchy circle around each one. And now I'm going to move on to the dark veins on the wings, and I'm just going to really loosely follow them. I'm not trying to go over the top of them. And it's just like really fast, really loose. And it does look great when it's finished. I'll also leave a link to my Etsy shop if you're interested in having a look at these paints. I've got a website, I sell them on my website, but I also sell them on Etsy. And they're for sale individual, as individual paints, and I've also got quite a few little sets. I also sell them in the half pans, which is a smaller one, and they're all available in the full pan as well if you wanted, you know, a larger pan of any particular colour. I've got loads of golds, loads. They're all metallics. All my paints are metallics. Some of them are glitter. Glitters are difficult to use, but once you get the knack of it, they're absolutely gorgeous. But I must say I do prefer the smooth metallics myself. Okay, so this is what the gold looks like. I'll show you it on this angle so you can see how lovely and shiny and glittery it is. I wasn't actually planning on putting the gold on this, and then I just thought at the last minute, yeah, I think I will. And I'm glad I did, because I think it looks really effective. So now I'm splashing some gold around the outside. Now I'm also adding some of the red paint. I'm just again tapping the top of the brush, and it's making a nice contrast with the other little paint splashes that I did earlier on the wet paper. They like spread out, and then now these ones are more concentrated. And then I also tap on some clear water on top of this, and that helps some more of them spread out. So that's kind of a close-up of all the splashes, what the splashes look like. And the last thing to do is just add some little shiny bits onto the eyes, and I'm just doing that with a white jelly roll pen. So that's the final butterfly. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I hope you followed along. I hope it made sense. And thanks very much for watching.